was 1997. I was 5 years old, and my family took me on a trip to southern China. As we walked through a major commercial district in downtown Shenzhen, I saw 4 young men walking alongside us, all fashionable and metropolitan. It's a busy street at noon, very crowded, but it's wide enough for 10 people to walk shoulder to shoulder, so they don't have to walk on our side of the street, but they did anyway. This is a shopping area with lots to see. My dad walked on the right, my mom in the middle, holding my hand loosely, and as the men I mentioned were just passing us, I felt a firm grip on my left forearm. They continued to walk as if nothing had happened. My parents continued to scroll through the stores, and I was confused by the situation, but didn't know what to do. So I squeezed my mother's hand as hard as I could, without even thinking of making a noise. And then the tugging on the hand intensified. I gripped her hand tighter until she turned and looked at me, and my hand slipped away. She didn't see anything, and I couldn't find the words to describe what happened because I was so young and all. Years later, when I was in college, I told her the story, and it was a bit of an eye-opener for me because if you know anything about China, child abduction is common there and extremely horrible. So I enlisted when I was 17 in 2011 for various reasons, but I just wanted to serve and fight mostly. Typical 17-year-old athlete video game player, right? Anyway, although I was a machine gunner in the infantry, I never saw combat because the war had completely died down, and I was sent all over Asia and the Pacific. But things got weird in Korea. So we were sent to this island a few miles from the North Korean DMZ to train with the Marines of the Republic of South Korea, ROAK. It's a small island, maybe 10 miles across, but it's just an insane amount of hills. While on the island, we camped on a small ridge that almost surrounded the campsite. Perfect location, you are hidden. There is only one way in and one way out. Perfect for any military camp. However, it was raining there, so we kept our guns and ammunition in this little run-down bunker that was up the ridge from where we were. We took turns guarding him overnight, and let me tell you, it was the most amazing experience I've ever had. So I sleep in my tent when I wake up to use the restroom. On my way back, I see a strobe from my friend standing guard on the hill. It was not normal. He was trying to signal someone without waking anyone up from screaming. So I go over to check on him, and he's shaking, eyes wide, full of fear and panic. And the conversation went something like this. "Hey, are you gay, dude? Something happened here." "What do you mean? How are the North Koreans?" "Hell no, dude. Worse. I hear voices and see shadows. I hear rustling in the bunker, but every time I check, there's just nothing there." "Huh. Are you sure you're not just sleep-deprived?" "No, I'm perfectly fine, but I'm just freaking out." "Could you rest with me until I calm down a bit?" "Yes, of course. Good." It was around 3 a.m. when I stayed with him. Everyone had to wake up in 2 hours, so I wouldn't be stuck there anyway. Nothing happened while I was with him, so around 4 o'clock he was back to normal, and the sun was on the horizon. So I told him when he needed to yell something and went back to sleep for an hour. The next night was my shift from 10 p.m. to 1:30 a.m., and it was quiet. It was actually quiet, but between 1:45 and 2 o'clock I heard footsteps. The bunker was behind me and I was facing camp, seeing that the only way to get to this bunker was from camp, unless you could climb a 90-degree cliff on the other side of the ridge without being noticed. Everyone is asleep, but I heard footsteps behind me at the bunker, so I turned around and saw nothing. Shortly after, I hear a faint whisper. Definitely not English, though, and I could almost make out Korean phrases, but it was too faint to know for sure. And this is where I started to get nervous. I remember seeing my friend's face as I approached him. His fear was real, very real, and I began to understand why. Then, a little later, I hear something in the bunker. I turn on the light and shine it on the bunker, but there is no one there. And at 3 o'clock I hear it again. This time, thinking it's nothing again, I turn to look without the light and see the shadow of someone standing over the small missile launchers, bending down to pick one up. I raised my rifle at him and yelled at him to get out of there, and he turned his head, looked at me, and just disappeared. Just vaporized like Spider-Man in Infinity War, and I immediately panicked. I was in a frenzy like my friend, and in my head I was thinking, what good is an M4 against a ghost? Nothing else happened after that, but I was definitely on the edge by sunrise. I kept the story to myself until my unit returned to Japan, where we were stationed. One night we were all drinking with just the breeze blowing, and another friend asked if we thought the island was creepy. My first friend mentioned his experience on watch, and everyone, and I mean everyone, could tell a similar story when they were on watch. It turns out that this island was a hotspot for strategic deployment and planning during the war, and thousands of soldiers and civilians died there. And I guess the war is not over for them. This is going to be a little long because I had a lot of experiences, but I hope you find them as creepy and exciting as I do. So when I was about 2 years old, my family moved to a newly built house in a small town in North Carolina. It all started when my mom was putting me in the crib for the night, and I kept looking back at her in the hallway and asking her in a childish way who these people were and what they wanted. She said it always scared her, but she always reassured me that no one was there. When I was about 7, 8 years old, I started playing with a neighbor boy about my age, and we became instant friends. We played pretty much all day while his grandmother kept a close eye on him, sometimes in my house and sometimes outside, riding bikes or playing hide and seek. I didn't find it surprising at that age, but looking back, I know his grandmother was wearing early 1900s clothing, a long dress with a collar, very simple, as if she made it herself or someone else, and her hair was always in a neat bun. One night I asked my mom if he could stay for dinner, and she kept asking who. She later told me that at the time we were only the third house built in the neighborhood, with 2 other houses still unsold. When I was about 10, we had a snow day and school was canceled. My parents went to work, but my 2 siblings who were still living in the house at the time were both in high school and stayed home with me. I knew better than to go and wake them up very early when I woke up, so I waited impatiently for them to wake up so we could go play in the snow. I was watching TV when I heard the door leading to the garage open to the kitchen. When opened, it makes a distinct squeak. I could hear them stamping their feet and shoveling the snow from their boots onto the carpet by the door. I ran to the door, excited and disappointed that they had gone to play without me. The door was ajar with wet stains on the carpet, but there was no one there. I ran up to their bedroom and they were both still asleep, and soon after that, things started to escalate from the usual footsteps or things disappearing, which were found in a completely different random place a few days later. My brother, 17 years old, began to complain that he doesn't sleep well. He said he heard whispers in his room, as if several people were having several different conversations at the same time, but the whispers were so quiet that he could not make out who was speaking. He also woke up to the open closet door, as he religiously closed it before bed each night. One night the whispering started, but this time it was followed by scratching. He soon realized it was coming from under his bed. At that moment, he heard a deep guttural laugh right in his ear, as if someone or something was sitting next to his bed with their mouth near his ear. Needless to say, he slept on my parents' bedroom floor on a pallet for several months after that. When I was 10 too, I woke up one night and just couldn't breathe. It felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest. I was young, panicked, and not thinking, so I didn't run to my parents' room. It wasn't sleep paralysis either because I could still move, but I laid like that for what felt like an eternity. But maybe 2, 3 minutes had passed when my bedroom door suddenly opened and my mom walked in. I was so relieved but thought it was weird that she knew I was going through this because I couldn't get through to her. She slowly walked over to my bed and I instantly grabbed her hand. I remember thinking how cold I was, but she was standing by my bed and very, very slowly bent down at the waist until her face was about 2 inches from mine and stayed like that for about 30 seconds, freaking me out. Then he got up just as slowly, lowered his hand, and left the room, closing the door. After about a minute or 2, I was able to breathe again and ran into my parents' room, where my dad was reading and my mom was lying next to me. I cried and screamed, asking why she left and was acting so strange and so cold. My dad told me she slept for over an hour and never came into my room. And that night I slept with my sister. Not long after that, one night I woke up to a knock and stuck my head out of my bedroom door. My parents' room was to my right at the end of the corridor, and at the other end of the hall was a bathroom shared by me, my sister, and my brother. My father came out of his room, and we were able to follow the noise into our bathroom. He turned on the light, and we both saw all our drawers and closet doors open and slam shut at the same time. He looked down at me and looked as scared as I was. He yelled stop, and they all just shut down and stopped immediately. My parents are very religious and actually Roman Catholic, so naturally they called our parish priest to come and consecrate the house again for the third time. This time when he came, he told us all to take a walk around the neighborhood while he performed an exorcism on our house. At the time, I didn't know what it was, but he assured us it would help, so I put up with it. When we returned from our walk, approx 30 minutes later, he was at the driveway waiting for us. He very quickly said that everything was fine, and that he would meet us at church on Sunday, got in his car and drove off. I remember thinking how strange that was, because he was close to our family, and we had planned for him to stay for dinner and everything. He also didn't tell us why he left like that. It seemed that everything calmed down and normalized after that. Traces and inappropriate objects. My parents still live in that house, and I'm not ashamed to say that my 25-year-old self refuses to sleep in my old bedroom to this day. I have more stories to tell, but I'll save them for another time. I hope you enjoyed it. This happened to me about a month ago. Also, for some context, I'm a woman in my 20s who live alone in a cozy attic apartment in an old Victorian building in the old servants' quarters where I belong. The design of the roof overhanging my window and the high walls of the driveway mean I get some interesting acoustics. In the stillness of the night, sounds bounce off the entire long street, even out of sight, and I can hear the footsteps and conversations of passers-by as crystal clear as if they were in the room with me. But standing on the disc, you don't hear them at all. It was almost 4 a.m. and it was pitch black outside.
I've had a hard time sleeping properly the past few nights, so I'm still awake and messing around in my pajamas with the lights on. I cracked open the window and half opened the blinds to get some fresh air. I usually keep them closed when the lights are on at night. You can see right into my room from the street and the houses across the street, which I unfortunately didn't realize in my first couple of months here. Sorry, neighbors, if you saw me dancing and cooking in my underwear. However, I was so excited about not getting enough sleep and being desperate for air that I thought everyone else would be napping. So I did the same for the previous 3 or 4 sleepless nights. I had just made my tea and settled down to read a book when I heard the doorbell ring. I remember thinking it was strange that I didn't hear anyone approaching because I was just sitting by my window. But I dismissed it as lack of sleep. No one who visits me ever rings the doorbell. They call my phone, so I grab the phone to check if I missed anything from a friend or family. But no, nothing happened. So I quickly ran to the window to look at the porch. But unfortunately, I could only see the steps leading up to it. However, the motion sensor light was on, and I heard strange sounds of fighting, and then some muffled thuds. I thought someone had mistakenly called the wrong apartment or something, and was probably just hanging out drunk. But even with my rational explanation, a strange feeling of unease came over me. I felt nervous after hearing thumps and turned off the lights so I could peek through the blinds so I wouldn't be seen. But unfortunately, I couldn't see much. After a few minutes, the noise stopped and the motion sensor light turned off, although I didn't see anyone coming down the steps. I figured I'd either miss them in the dark or the person they were looking for had just missed them. After about 20 minutes, I relaxed and turned the lamp back on to put it back on. But about a minute later, my beeper rang again. And this time, there was a repeated ringing sound, as if someone was aggressively pressing the button. I froze and stared at it for a while, not knowing what to do now. However, it started to get annoying, and I started to worry that someone I knew actually needed help. I mean, why else would they be ringing my doorbell at like 4 a.m.? And so I plucked up the courage to answer this time, albeit with a trembling hand. I said hello, but there was no answer. But over the interference of the phone, I can hear someone breathing heavily. It sounded like a person. Who is this and what do you want? He doesn't answer again, just breathes. I hung up the phone, thinking they must have mistaken the apartment or the telecommunications was down again, and stood by the wall phone for a few moments, staring at it, unsure of what to do. The buzzer rang loudly again, and I nearly jumped out of my skin because I was so excited. Who is this? Why do you keep calling me? All I hear is static again. Thinking I was going to be knocked off my feet by the ding-dong as I chased my American friends across the big pond, I went to hang up again. But before that, I heard a muffled voice, raised the phone to my ear, and demanded to know who it was. What was it? Let me in. What? Who are you? Let me in. Please, please. His voice starts to turn into panic. I won't let you. You didn't say who you were. People come to me. They tried to jump me and I ran away. I'm not safe here. Please, you must let me in. Please. Immediately, I did not go and hung up. There was no way I was letting a stranger into my house, no matter what their name was, especially since I had to leave the safety of my locked apartment to physically go down to the porch to open it. My gut also told me that his story was complete bullshit. But if that was true, I was worried there was going to be a crazy fight on my front porch. So I grabbed my cell phone and dialed 999, running to turn off the lights and close the blinds again, peering through the crack. The man has been ringing my buzzer non-stop since I hung up the phone, but shortly after I turned off the light, it stopped again. The strange shuffling and banging on the porch started again as I explained the situation to the 911 operator on the phone. She urged me to stay calm and talked to her on the phone and said the police already knew something was up. Someone else from my building called earlier to report that a person was trying to break in the front door after trying to break all the first-floor windows on the side and back. They also had a similar call a few nights ago, and that explains the strange noises I kept hearing and why I didn't hear him approaching from the street from the front. The noises had already stopped, but I was starting to panic quite a bit. I asked the lady when the police would come, and she said they would send a squad as soon as they did. Yes, the recent cuts to police funding, right? And stay locked inside. After 10 minutes of no activity on the street and the emergency light being turned off, the woman said to stay in my apartment with the door locked. Of course, as if I was going to do anything else, and to call back when he reappeared and they'd end it if he made his way into the building, and then she'd just end the call. I sat by the window and watched, and sure enough, after a few minutes, the noise started again and the light came on downstairs. To be honest, I really don't think he ever left, or he went down to the car park in the back, or anything like that. I still couldn't see what was going on because of the angle from my window. I was about to call the police again when a passing taxi driver slammed on his brakes and shouted out the window, and I stopped to listen. The taxi driver said, "Hey, you, what are you doing there? I dropped you off at the other end of town an hour ago." This meant that the taxi driver knew the man. What a twist, right? A random man said, "Oops, I lost my keys. My friends live here and I'm trying to get them to let me in." I see the man's shoulder and leg slightly coming out around the corner, and the taxi driver says, "You told me you were going home to get some sleep and not cause any more trouble like you used to. I asked you to go out, and you asked me to take you home, so I did, and now you are not at home." The man then says, "I just said I didn't have the keys to get in. I try to stay with my friends, they live here." At this point, you could hear the man start to worry, and a harshness crept into his tone as he lied again. Then the taxi driver said, "Then why are you walking downstairs making noise instead of ringing the bell? What is happening? What are you really doing?" And the man at that moment gets angry and rushes to the driveway to confront the taxi driver. This is my first time looking at him properly, although I only saw his back. And he looked quite normal, a well-presented young man with brown hair, a black t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. I was really surprised by his appearance. I mean, he wouldn't be someone I would normally think to avoid late at night. I couldn't make out what he said next as they were both shouting at each other. But I heard the taxi driver shouting for the police, and the man suddenly rushed to the door of his car. The taxi driver quickly screeched off down the road, leaving the man standing there cursing and seething. It was at this point that I realized I was a complete idiot, frozen by the window, watching this scene unfold on my side without calling the police to let them know he was back. I bent down to pick up my phone, which I must have dropped in the commotion. While I was talking to the other operator, the man turned and walked a bit down the driveway, but seemed to hesitate and stopped, staring at my building. I tried to get a good look at his face, but it was too dark to make out the details.
He stood like that for almost 10 minutes, just standing there looking at my window, swaying from side to side from time to time. I intelligently knew he couldn't see what I looked like, but I could have sworn he was looking right at me and knew I was there. He stopped looking at my window and looked at the door for a few moments. I begged the EMS operator to call the police, as I was afraid he would try to open the door again. However, I think the confrontation with the taxi driver made him lose his temper, and he became worried about the police showing up. I heard him give a strange huff or snort of frustration as he turned and left my driveway, walking slowly down the street and out of sight. I told the 911 operator the direction he was headed and hung up. About 10 minutes later, I saw a police car with its headlights off going in the direction he had gone. No wonder they never found him, because too much time had passed, and there were too many streets and alleys around for him to just slide down and away. He never came back, but I stayed awake at that window until sunrise, crying my little eyes out and smoking like hell. I didn't sleep for weeks after that, and I became very paranoid walking to and from my building. I've also stopped taking the containers out when the sun is setting at least a little now. And luckily I've already started the process of moving elsewhere for unrelated reasons, so I only have a couple more weeks to live here before I move into a big house with friends. It's also a bit of a shame because I used to enjoy living on my own, but now I'm very grateful to lose my privacy to have some sort of backup. Also, I want to commend the brave taxi driver who stopped to confront him. You were more helpful than the local police, and I don't know if he would have left if you hadn't scared him like that. And I'd like to ask you what the hell happened when you met that man early at night. Okay, I know it's the internet, but you'll just have to trust me when this happened to me. And please bear with this slightly long memory. So my very Catholic grandmother owned a house in rural New York. We often went there when we went camping or on vacation as a family. This place has always had such an amazing vibe as it is over 150 years old. I've had several paranormal experiences, such as seeing a ghostly man in a brown coat and top hat in the kitchen, or heard children's voices in the bunk bedroom when no one was home. And also lights that act weird, like the bulbs and the holiday lights that go out one after the other in sequence instead of all at once, and lots of weird stuff. But these experiences never evoked emotion or threat, just amazing things that I was convinced I saw, until one day when I was about 10, so I was there by myself while my grandma went shopping and watched Avatar and Legos and played with Legos and pretty standard stuff. One day I went into the bathroom and noticed the cellar door. I had never thought of the cellar because it was always locked and forbidden, but being unattended and bald, I opened the door to take a look. It was pitch black on that stairwell, but after about 3 seconds I felt an intense coldness and a horrible feeling of just plain evil, like primal fear. Every instinct of my being and soul went into full panic mode as I felt a presence rapidly approaching the stairs. I closed the door and locked it as fast as I could, ran into the living room and grabbed the cross, convinced it was some kind of demon. And when she told my grandmother about it, her face went completely white, like she wasn't so much shocked as scared, and like she knew something about it that she wasn't telling me. She called the priest to the house and asked him to consecrate the place. When he opened the door to the basement, he really came to an abrupt halt and slowly descended. He blessed down there and confessed to us that he felt the same terror, but now the house is protected by the Lord and we have nothing to fear. I was always wary after that, but never experienced it again, and certainly never went near the basement again. As I grew up, it weighed less on me, and I thought maybe I was just a kid who scared myself. Maybe I had a grandmother who was so religious that she thought there was a non-existent demon here, and maybe the priest felt what we told him we felt, and maybe it was all invalid. Unfortunately for this theory, and the reason I'm sharing this, is that I found out a few years ago that the family that moved into the house after my grandparents moved to Florida suddenly was driving. They actually forfeited their down payment and left immediately because, and I'm quoting from the realtor's report, the demons in the basement were terrorizing their children to an unbearable degree. So I don't know what was down there, but it definitely wasn't human, it wasn't kindness, and it definitely wasn't fiction. I lived in a small town in Pennsylvania, and it was a snow day, so school was closed. I am a girl, and I was about 11 years old at the time. My two cousins, both men, lived about a 15-minute walk down the road. One of my cousins was my age. The other was about 6. The neighborhood we lived in was usually quiet and very safe. Not much happened, and when something happened, everyone knew about it immediately. It was the town where my parents, and even most of my grandparents grew up, so everyone basically knew each other. So we decided to go sledding, and one day I went to their house. My aunt was actually a stay-at-home mom, so she was there. She met me at the door when I arrived, and I waited for my cousins to put on their snowsuits. After they drove around, the 3 of us went back to the sled from the barn. My aunt decided that while we got everything we needed, she would shovel the sidewalk across the street and make a path for us to get to the car. They had a long sidewalk from the back door that led to the barn, and next to the barn was an alley that was rarely used at the end of the backyard. The 3 of us had just walked up to the barn and noticed that the door was either locked or stuck. As we stood there fiddling with the door, an old pickup truck with 2 elderly men crawls up the alley and stops next to or behind us. The driver then got out and quickly went around the passenger side to the 3 of us. He was about 2 feet away from us, and we didn't think anything of it because everyone was focused on the door. If suddenly I heard my aunt yelling, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" And as soon as she asked him, the man ran back, got into his truck, and just sped down the alley. After calling the police and describing the man and what happened, my aunt lectured us about being more vigilant, and she wondered why we didn't pick up my younger cousin and run home. But to be honest, we were 2 11-year-olds, and, admittedly, we were a bit naive, but we had no idea anything was wrong, and we didn't really notice that someone was even trying to kidnap us. Our backs were turned to the man and we were focused on the barn door. I really only saw him with my visual sight. As far as I can remember, the men were never caught either. To this day, I have no idea how she even knew anything was going on. The snow drowned out most of the sounds you would normally hear outside, and it was pretty quiet inside the truck. She also told us that she just felt something was wrong and came back to check on us to make sure everything was okay. And to her surprise, we were almost caught. I think about it from time to time too, and it still gives me chills. I always wonder what would have happened if she hadn't checked on us. I'm forever grateful for her mother's intuition, because she literally saved all of our lives. I finally had a place to myself. I lived in Austin, and I always had roommates or lived with a roommate. I broke up with my boyfriend and found a place for myself. I went to my parents for Christmas, and when I came back, I had major surgery. He also went back to party downtown every night after work. I had a normal routine of coming home at 2 a.m., jumping in the shower, putting on my pajamas, face mask, hair still in a towel, wrapping myself in a blanket and watching murder mystery, alien conspiracies on TV for a few hours because I'm usually still was quite inspired by the night. One night, however, I sensed something was wrong and looked up from the television. My apartment had huge windows in the front living room and back bedroom that slid like sliding doors, for context. I looked up to see a man with a shirt over his head and pants around his ankles, just jerking off at me, watching TV in a towel turban and a green mask. I got up and told him to get lost, and he ran off and tripped over his pants. I didn't think too much about it because Austin is amazing. But after a few nights he returned, so this time I opened the door and yelled at him. 3 nights later he returned again, and this time I called the police, and they came out and obviously he wasn't there, but they took my description of a naked man. A few nights later he returned again. I call the police and my friend or colleague, who obviously doesn't believe me. And this picture continues for 2 months. Every few days this guy would show up. The police annoyed me, and they actually parked a police car outside my apartment for 2 weeks. Obviously, this guy wasn't going to just walk out with the cops, so the cops finally thought, bad for you. It's happening again, and they're bringing helicopters over my neighborhood looking for a naked dude. None of my friends believe me, and I don't think the police do either. The only person who believes me is my neighbor in the army, who is taking me to buy a surveillance camera that we have nowhere to put because the window reflects too much light on the camera. So now I have this pattern of calling the police, neighbors, friends, co-workers, anyone who thinks I'm making this up every 3 nights or so. My apartment complex said I could leave if I felt I was in danger, and I honestly didn't think I was in any danger. At the time, I was really annoyed that this guy was pulling his eggs on me wearing green masks during my 2 a.m. downtime. Well, in the end I gave up on being believed by everyone except my neighbor. He had a sister who had a stalker, so yeah, it makes sense that he would believe me. And that night I came back from the party, and I go about my normal routine and turn on Ancient Aliens. I'm sleeping on the sofa when I hear a noise from the bedroom. So I slowly sit and listen. There is a sliding noise, followed by the noise of the blinds opening. I get up, and luckily the kitchen knife drawer was literally part of the hallway, so I just start throwing knives down the hallway at the window and yelling, "Damn it, why me?" I finally look at the guy in the window, my naked dude, and he's just looking at me in shock like I'm not. He's crazy, and like I shouldn't throw knives at him. And then we had a brief staring contest before my neighbor ran downstairs, bursting through the door like an Avenger or something, and the guy ran away. 911, and we're on the phone again, and my neighbors are on the phone with my family telling them to send me back to Dallas and anywhere else that isn't on the first floor. I ended up having to line up at the police station. I picked out a guy, but there was no proof it was him, and I quickly returned to Dallas. Eventually, I moved on with my life, and one day I was watching the news with my brother, and the Austin bomber was on TV, and there he was, my naked dude. So, I've only told this story to a few friends, but I'm either laughing because they don't believe me, or they're just freaking out like I was when the incident actually happened. So, one Thanksgiving night when I was about 10, now 23, my cousin Chris and my brother Arf and our old friend David decided to play hide-and-seek next door. We were all the same age and often played outside because we just wanted to get away from grown-up things. We also got a few highs from lurking next door after dark and whatnot. So we set boundaries, and we had one main rule. You cannot hide in the house. Mind you, it broke a lot, but we always installed it anyway. On this day, Arf and David were hiding while Chris and I were searching. We counted up to 100 and went looking for them. About 15 minutes passed, and we did not find them anywhere. Then 30 minutes, 45 minutes, they were nowhere to be found. Chris and I were a bit concerned at this point, considering it had been too long since we had seen them. We started shouting, "Arf, David, get out, we're not playing anymore." But there was no answer. We then went into the house to check all the rooms, but nothing. Only adults eat, laugh, and generally celebrate Thanksgiving. Chris and I went ahead and started saying that we should probably get help from the adults and let them know what was going on. We didn't want to alert the whole group by telling them we couldn't find Arf and David, so we somehow got David's dad to go out on the front lawn and see if he could help spot them from a distance or something. So we pull up to the edge of the driveway with David's dad, and he suddenly yells, "Hey, I think that's your brother." My cousin and I look over and see my brother running away from us on the sidewalk. While David's father stays at the edge of the driveway, Chris and I start running after him, yelling for him to give up and that we're not playing anymore. We didn't catch up with him, but we weren't far off either. We were about 10 feet away from him. We see him running and hiding behind a couple of palm trees that stood in the corner of one of the houses down the block. We finally felt like we had cornered him. Chris goes to the right side and I go to the left. At that second, we knew we had him. That was until we looked behind the tree and there was no one there. Chris and I exchanged a stunned look because the only way he could have escaped was either through us or over the 6-foot fence that was on the hill, and we knew that was impossible because we would have seen or heard him. My cousin and I immediately went back and met David's dad at the edge of the driveway. David's father automatically says, "You guys saw that, right?" And we said, "Of course we chased after him." He says, "Well, because Half and David are actually in the house." We got back to the house, and no one believed a word we said, even when David's father said he saw the kid too. My brother swears it wasn't him, and that he and David were in the house the whole time spying on us. The thing that always comes to mind when I think about this story, aside from the fact that it wasn't my brother or our friend David, is that when Chris and I were chasing after him or whoever was, I remember the feeling that I just wasn't running as fast as I could. What would happen if I actually caught up with this guy or kid or whatever? What would happen then? I can't help but think it was some kind of paranormal event, but every time my cousin and I talk about this story, we refer to this man as the Red Man because of the red shirt. He was dressed just like my brother that Thanksgiving night. This happened in my last year of high school in 2015. On Saturday night, I was driving home alone with my friends to the movies. After about 5 minutes, it becomes the same route I take to school every day, so I go into autopilot. I never pee or drive, I rarely speeded, and I certainly didn't speed then because I still had my junior license. I was pulling up to a traffic light that just turned green in enough time that I wouldn't have to slow down. Now, I always do little, but I went through the light and then I just remember the greatest power I've ever felt in my life. I opened my eyes when I heard a man banging on the window, yelling, asking if I could get out or if I needed to break the window. I was able to unbuckle the seatbelt, and the door opened as soon as I unlocked it. I went to look for my phone, and the man said, "Forget your phone. I've already called the police, and they're on their way. Please go sit on that hill far away. It's smoking, and I want to make sure that doesn't happen. Kindle a fire." So, dazed and confused, I went to sit where he told me to, after he asked if everything was okay. I had glass in my hand as well as in my face, but it was not life-threatening, so I just had to wait for the ambulance to arrive. As I sat on the hill, I heard the man helping me yell, "Hey, where the hell are you thinking?" and just did a full sprint down the road. I was so confused. I mean, why would this person who just helped me chase this poor 50-year-old woman down the road? I soon realized it was the woman who hit me because she was nowhere to be seen after I saw her get out of the car. She tried to flee from the scene. However, the man successfully retrieved her and brought her back to the scene. The cops were there when he got back with her, and he immediately told the cops about the breathalyzer about the other woman. He gave his statement, or while it was happening, this sweet boy, whose house it was not far from home, brought me a bag of M. Suddenly I hear, "Yes, fuck you, you little whore. Do you think it's on me? No, you hit me." I told the boy with me to go back to his mom at this point and thank you very much. This was definitely not the scene for an 8-year-old boy. Then she says, "I know you can hear me. Don't ignore me. You can't because you will see me in court suing your ass." Then she tried to approach me and one of the officers restrained her. And at that point they said she blew up a .23 and they handcuffed her. I still had to give a police statement and I thought, what should I say? And then in the midst of all this, I realized that I had even forgotten to call my parents. My mom was in another country for work, so I called my dad. My dad was at a concert in about 3 hours, so he called my neighbor. My neighbor, our best family friend since before I was born, calls me and says, "I'll be there in 10 inches. Don't tell the police until you tell me the story." I told him I was nervous because I was the one who T-boned her. He said, "Just tell me what happened." And I said I went through a 100% green light, and a lady went through a red light hitting me, and she blew a .23, and he lost it. He came over and said, "You almost killed an 18-year-old because you got behind the wheel after drinking. How stupid do you have to be in this day and age to do that?" And she said, "Well, yes, I wish I was. That girl must have thought they could take me and not her if she was the one who hit me." She continued to scream like that the entire time we were there. Just, said I was horrible and that she wished she'd killed me. And finally, the police took her away and my cuts were mended. They've been doing that throughout this whole thing, by the way. My car was completely removed. It was a Volvo, and the cops said that based on what they had seen in other accidents, if it had been any other car, I would definitely have been seriously injured. I honestly thought I would have to meet her in court, but she never even showed up. I hope I never have to see her again, and I really wish I knew the name or number of the person who helped me. He simply disappeared after giving his statement, but he was the real hero in it all. I really don't know what I would do without him. Oh, and thanks to the poor kid who got to see a crazy alcoholic get arrested. It happened 14 years ago when I was 17 years old. This happened in my childhood home, which I explained in a previous post that many strange things happened there, and it's the scariest paranormal experience I've ever had to date. I always knew my house was haunted. I saw things out of the corner of my eye, heard strange sounds, and just had strange things happen. I really tried to convince myself that it was partly just my imagination and my own interest in the paranormal. But one night in February, I experienced something that still makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Therefore, when I was 17 years old, my parents separated. I decided to stay in my family home with my father. My father became ill again at this time and was actually a heavy drinker, so I was left alone quite often, especially when he was drinking. To get a better picture of this story, I also need to explain how the house was arranged. So the first thing is that the living room was huge. The sofa was placed on one wall, which had a window to the kitchen, and no glass, just a cutout rectangle that allows us to see each other from the kitchen to the living room. To get to the kitchen, you have to go through the study and the corridor around the house. At the back of the kitchen is the stairs to the basement, and our back door that leads to our backyard, which has its own driveway if we park at the back of our house. One night I was alone. I've always been a night owl too, and it happened around 2 in the morning. I was sitting on the couch watching CSI when I heard the back door open and close. This was not unusual as my uncle lived nearby and the nearest access was across the lane from our yard. So my first thoughts were annoyance. When my father would come in the back door, he would walk by my uncle, and he would definitely be very drunk. So I called my dad, but there was no answer. Annoyed that he wasn't answering, I shouted, "Dad!" But again there was no answer. I'm really shocked at this point, because if he doesn't answer me, then he's really drunk, and I hated dealing with him like that. So I got up from the sofa and turned to look through the kitchen window, which showed the kitchen and the back door, and I said, "Dad," and stopped as soon as I saw it. At first I couldn't believe what I was looking at. In the middle of my kitchen stood a black silhouette about 7 or 8 feet tall. I could see the creature's head, shoulders, arms, and legs, but no facial features. It was completely black, like the blackest I had ever seen. I was horrified and whispered one last time to my dad to make sure I wasn't dreaming or hoping it was just a joke or something. But there was no answer, no movement, only a tall, dark shadow staring. I quickly ran to the table across the living room, grabbed an envelope knife. It was the only weapon available. Walked around the corner to the porch, grabbed my boots. It's February in northern Canada, and just stood there in silence, waiting to see what would happen when I will stay. I have to admit I was a little curious at this point, and it overcame my fear at the time. After standing there for a few minutes, I heard a screeching sound coming from the kitchen. My cat walked past me from the living room to the kitchen. She looked into the kitchen and suddenly started behaving very strangely. She moved one leg with a kind of violent movement. All her hair was up, and as soon as she snapped out of the trance she was in, she just ran upstairs. And I'm done with that. I ran out the door and ran barefoot through the snow until I felt safe. I put on my boots and continued walking to the local shop to call my father. My dad was actually sober at his girlfriend's place and agreed to pick me up and take me home and investigate. He entered the house first, looked around and found nothing. Then I hesitantly went inside and told him it was through the back door. He went to the back door and said how it was locked, and the color drained from my face as I had to turn the handle myself and try to open the door again, but it wouldn't open. I still really don't know what happened that night, or why this thing came to me, or what it wanted at all. I know it scared the crap out of me, and I refused to sleep in the house for weeks afterwards, and to this day discussing it makes my eyes water and my hair stand on end. Something definitely entered my house that night, something completely unsolicited. This happened a while ago when I was about 16 or 17. At the time, I was living with my older sister as a babysitter for my 3 nephews, and my room was in an unfinished basement, like just a big area with a carpet on the floor. A chest of drawers, a bed, a TV, the usual. So one day I was reading there or something when I heard my sister's voice, clear as day, calling me downstairs, "Hey, come upstairs." Not having any reason to think about it, I rolled off the bed and headed for the stairs. When I get about halfway up, a feeling of just absolute horror came over me. My hair stands on end and my skin crawls. However, it's mid-afternoon. The sun is shining brightly through the many windows in the entryway, which is at the top of the open staircase, and I'm just trying to brush it off, thinking, what the hell? I get to the top, and well-being only worsens. I shout my sister's name and quickly realize something. The house is quiet, and anyone with any number of young children, especially 3 boys under the age of 10, knows that never happens. Small carpeted steps lead up to the main house's always open French doors. I don't see anyone inside, and as soon as I take a step towards it, my heart jumps into my throat. I have never been more afraid of anything than at that moment. On a whim, I left to check on the car in the attached garage. I had just opened the door when I heard her voice again. "Come in here." I looked into the garage, saw that there was no car there, and for that moment I wasted no time. I raced down the steps to the basement, grabbed my car keys, and just huffed out of there. It's been 10 years, and I still don't know what happened that day. I told my friends and family and got a few, "You just scared yourself, silly girl, and must have been imagining things like that." But I don't think so. By that time I had lived there for several months. I had been alone dozens of times, and nothing like this had ever happened before. So if anyone has any ideas, I'm all ears. So when I was little, my stepfather worked the night shift at a gas station on the outskirts of Reno, Nevada, in a nice part of town, just off the highway before you go up to the Sierra Nevada and Lake Tahoe. The area was quite new back then, and the Shell gas station was very good. My stepfather never had a problem with working the night shift, even though he told me there would be interesting characters, and he often had regulars with whom he also befriended. My stepfather was the only one in the shop when he worked the night shift, and always told me about the ghosts that liked to pester the other workers, like turning off the lights, opening or closing the bathroom door, knocking the snacks off the shelf, working. My stepfather, being a great skeptic, didn't believe any of these stories, and since nothing had happened to him personally, he just brushed them off. Until one night. So my stepdad works night shifts, and the night is pretty quiet. It didn't get many customers except for gas, and since it's a gas station fee, hardly anyone comes into the store anyway. So my stepdad is on his phone and often glances at the door or the security monitor to see if anyone is coming, but the station is empty. He turns his attention to his game again when he hears the electronic sliding door open and the chime above the door fades. My stepfather puts down the phone and looks up to greet the customer but sees no one. He calls out, but no one answers. He glances at the surveillance camera, but sees no one in the store but him, and no cars at the station or in the parking lot. Apparently, he gets a bit weirded out by this, as the doors have sensors, and the only time they open is when they sense someone approaching them. But he just thinks it's a prank or some kind of malfunction and goes back to his game. But then he hears a hello, and he hears a clear-as-day voice right in front of him, and his head immediately snaps up to speak to a customer he clearly hasn't seen before. But there is no one there. He's even more confused, but convinces himself that he's either imagining things or that the sound is somehow coming from his phone or radio. And then he hears screams. He said the woman's screams came out of nowhere, and they were so loud and so terrifying that he jumped and dropped the phone. My stepdad is actually a pretty big guy, about 6'2" and a bit stocky, and he's usually not afraid of anything. But he said the screams scared him so much that he couldn't really think. He ran out from behind the counter and checked the aisles, but no one was there. He checked the bathrooms and the closet and no one was there either. But the screams were still being heard, and they were definitely loud. So he thinks maybe there's a woman outside who might be hurt or attacked or something. He runs outside, where he thinks a woman is screaming, and there is no one there either. The lot is just completely empty. There are no people, no cars, nothing. He checks the back of the store and does a loop, but can't find the source of the scream, and just as suddenly as it started, the scream stops. He goes back inside and checks the security tapes to see if he missed anything, but other than running in and out of the store like an idiot, he can't see anything else and doesn't know what to think. The next day, when he leaves work and his colleague takes over, he tells them what happened, brushing it off as just some weird prank by some fool. But the answer of a colleague at work was completely different. And although my stepfather does not believe in any paranormal phenomena, those words always remained in his memory. The guy said, "Oh, so you heard her too. I don't really believe in the paranormal. I think there must have been an explanation too, but I was too young to know what it was. However, I'm going to tell the story as I remember it. So my room wasn't very big, just a typical square room, mostly occupied by a chest of drawers, a bookshelf, a combo TV stand, and my double bed. The bed divided the room in half, separating the front door from the wardrobe. When I was young and liked having a fan, I had one of those long extension light chains so I could turn off the light and still enjoy the fan at night. I was in my room just messing around, just before bed. I have always been an active person, even as a child. I've never been in the house without a trusty toy ball or toy ball close at hand, and tonight was no exception. I don't remember why I swung because, again, it's a small room, but I swung the sword, and it hit the long chain for the light. Anyone who has ever accidentally knocked on a chain knows what happens next. The chain flies through the air, wraps endlessly around the lamp, turns off the light, and in an instant, I'm plunged into darkness. Annoyed, I climbed onto the bed and began to unsteadily get up. I didn't want to put my hand in the fan blade, but I had to get really close to it to start untangling the chain. And I froze when I heard a rustle and then a groan. It sounded close, actually in my room with me. It was like a closet door sliding open on an old rut. I kept trying to get up, but now the hair on my arms was standing on end. The groaning of the door finally stopped, but instead he heard heavy, guttural breathing. Imagined, of course. I mean, I should have. After all, what little boy doesn't have an overactive imagination, right? However, I was afraid. I gave up trying to untangle the light chain and instead reached for the top of it where the chain went right into the light fixture. The breathing got closer, and my brain was happy to make louder sounds and the horrible image of everything they belonged to crawling over to my bed. I found the chain and pulled. I know what I did. I heard a click, but maybe I just wanted to hear it because the light didn't flood the room and chase away the darkness of my fears. I pulled again and again. The chain must have been wound too tight to turn on the light or something. It certainly was. However, I couldn't wait any longer to find out. I jumped out of bed and rushed to my bedroom door, opened it and let the light from the hallway flood into the room. I turned around, holding the toy sword, but there was nothing there. The darkness of my bedroom stared at me. A bed and chest of drawers, a bookcase with a TV and an Xbox on them, but without monsters. I went back into my room and climbed back into bed. I reached out and, using the hall light, gave the base of the light cord a firm tug, and with a loud click, the light turned on, and my bedroom returned to normal. I unwound the light chain from the lamp and climbed out of bed, sunspots dancing in my eyes from staring at the light, and I have to admit I was feeling a little groggy for the last few minutes. But it was okay. It was all just my imagination. There was no monster. The light just wouldn't come on because I wasn't pulling it the right way. I could explain everything very easily. Except, why was my closet door open now? Growing up, my stepfather moved around a bit while his father was still in the Air Force. And eventually his father got out and they settled in a small town in South Dakota called Underwood. Today Underwood is still pretty small and there's not much to do, but in the late 80s to mid-90s or so, there was even less to do. From what I understood when my stepfather told me this, Underwood was mostly houses and land, with a few small shops in town and I think a liquor store. He said if you didn't want to drive an hour or so to get to Rapid City, the most fun kids had in those days was drinking, driving late at night, or parking outside to drink and smoke. So not a lot of action. One night when my stepfather was a teenager, he and a couple of his friends decided to go to a pond somewhere on the outskirts of town. They parked on the dirt road, turning the car towards the pool. Beyond the water was a strip of trees, and behind the trees was a chain-link fence enclosing the area. After the chain-link fence was another dirt road leading from there. He said he remembered it being warm that night, without a cloud in the sky, and since the city was miles away, the stars and moon were bright enough to shining up across the square, just enough for them to see their surroundings, and see each other. So my stepdad and his friends are sitting around the car drinking and just blowing the whistle when they notice something strange. There is light. Now the light is moving along the fence, sweeping back and forth, and at first the boys think it's a police car pulling up to see who's trespassing. But there are several problems with this idea. First, there is only one light source, and secondly, the light does not break. This means that the light must be on the outside of the fence and break as it passes. And because of the fence and the trees along the fence, the light had to disappear behind the trees and then reappear as it passed the trees. But the light was solid and remained solid the entire time it passed. So my stepdad and his friends are trying to figure out what the thing is, and one of them points out that the light isn't even on near the ground. He swims maybe about waist deep, but since there was a lake of water between them, it was hard to tell how high it actually was off the ground. They thought that maybe it could be a person with a flashlight, but the way the ball of light moved and the way it looked was completely different from someone holding a flashlight. And though they were far from the light, they could not distinguish the shadow of the man who held it. My stepfather and his friends watched the light for a few more moments until it simply disappeared without any warning. Feeling unsettled, they decided to leave and just go somewhere for a drink. Apparently, they didn't tell anyone what they saw because they broke quite a few laws that night and never went back there to drink again. And to this day, my stepfather has no idea what it was. He's a pretty big skeptic, despite all the strange things that have happened to him. He has a few more stories. He doesn't believe in the paranormal and is always trying to come up with plausible excuses for why it could be. But this one, he always said, he just couldn't fully explain. So what do you think? I would say I was about 8 years old when it happened. At the time, we had to get mail from the post office in town, so seeing my mom getting mail made my brain decide, wow, I want to be cool and get mail like Mom too. It was such a childish need to prove that I was an adult. Finally, after a while and lots of begging, Mom let me get my mail. I guess it was the weekend as the post office was closed, but you could still pick up your mail, but the people who worked there weren't really there. I asked my mom if I could pick up the mail as we slowly drove up to the post office. She nodded and gave me the keys, which included the post office key and several others, such loud and jingly keys, and I jumped out of the old van and ran up the ramp to the building, avoiding the stairs entirely. I opened the door to see a woman and a man getting the mail, but when I turned around, I saw an older man sitting in the corner looking at me. He immediately gave me a weird vibe, even as a kid, but I still gave him a quick smile and waved. And it was a bad move. The man smiled back, revealing stained teeth. I walked past him and went to the mailbox. I, though, forgot what the key was and began fumbling clumsily as the others left the building, grabbing their mail. After maybe 5 minutes of trying and failing, I finally got it unlocked, and I was so happy I just ignored the person watching as I grabbed the mail, and with a quick click of the lock I closed the drawer and left away. I found the man's gaze as he looked at me with a wry smile on his face. The look he gave me still gives me chills almost a decade later. I opened my hand to the door and started to push me, when a pair of hands wrapped around me. One hand forcefully closing the door, and the other wrapped around the top of my chest like a collarbone, pulling me into a tight, unwanted and horrible hug. I immediately immobilized. I mean, what was I supposed to do? I was always taught to respect adults, and I did. He smelled strongly of alcohol, so much so that I think I coughed a few times. He started talking after just holding me there, and the words he said really scared me. But now I only remember part of what he said, and honestly, I wish I did. He said, hey, where are you going? He also spoke in an almost passive-aggressive manner. I said, oh, I have to go, Mom is waiting for me. He said, oh, good. He looked devastated and immediately started to let go of me, but before I could pull away, he hugged me tighter again, and actually tighter than before. Wait, he said, I have a dog, you know. Now he had this stupid smile on his face. that scary smile. I said, "Oh, that's cool." And he said, "Yes, you must come with me and play with him." And the worst thing about this whole thing is that I almost went with him at that moment. The next maybe 8 minutes felt like hours as he let go of me and pulled me tightly into him, his stubby beard and soft, dirty coat touching me. It's a headache to remember the details, but he kept telling me no, almost ordering me to come with him. Finally, he seemed to snap and said, "Well, you're coming with me." And I said, "What? But I need my mother. I have her keys and she is waiting for me, please." Surprisingly, it was still my priority, her keys and mail. He said, "No, you will come with me now." He opened the door and started to pull me out, and in his moment of weakness, I managed to break away, running to my mother in her car. I closed the door, scaring my brother and mother. I started shaking and crying as I dropped the mail on the floor of the car. I took it shakily and handed it all over to my mother as she demanded to know what had happened. I told her everything and she looked very angry. I was so glad she was by my side that day. I looked outside, tears still streaming down my face, and noticed a man staring at me through the car window from the ramp of the building. I started to cry harder and panic as he started to approach. My mom stopped me when she noticed him walking. And why did she think he was completely harmless? Well, he fell at the bottom of the ramp and tripped. My mom laughed at the awfulness and started to disappear while she tried to comfort me by saying things like, "He was just a harmless old drunk and he didn't hurt you." But now, years later, I reminded my father about it when I was at his house. My parents divorced 3 years after the incident, thinking he knew about it. And my mom just didn't tell him. And that's why he was really angry. But in the end, I managed to calm him down, and he got really angry that my mom didn't come for me sooner and that she didn't do more. I told him not to contradict my mom about it, and he agreed. Now, shortly after I told my father about it, I mentioned it to my mother. And my mom said that apparently I was just a drama queen, that I would never get hurt, that he never tried anything. And boy, was I furious. But now I don't know if I should be. I know drunken moans, but it was almost angry and his tone was demanding. And so my question that I'll leave with you guys is, what do you think his intentions were? And am I right to be angry? I read a story the other day and was on the verge of tears because of how similar my experience was. It's been about 7 years since this event happened to me, and while it brings little to no problems in my life, PTSD, anxiety and all, it is still an experience that has always stayed with me. The experience always comes back to me at least once or twice a week. Anyway, whether you choose to believe it or not, I'm nervous about posting this because I don't want to come across as some delusional person or some tool just trying to get street credit or something. That's one of the 2 reasons I'm sharing this anonymously. So I was 12 years old and I was on summer vacation. At that point, I had been living in a college town in Pennsylvania for 6 years. It was a typical nice suburban area. I've never had a problem with lucid dreams or sleep paralysis and still don't. I tried several times to convince myself that I somehow had a night terror, but the more I think about this event, the harder it is to convince myself that it was just a dream. So I remember waking up around 2:40 a.m. It started out as nothing out of the ordinary, but as soon as I recovered a bit from waking up, I felt a pit in my stomach. I was wide awake and conscious, but for some reason I just couldn't move. I could only whisper too, parallel to the fact that I had a nightmare. I've always had a level of control in my dreams, a level of awareness, just by making things up. I knew for sure that I was awake and everything was there. I'm trying to figure out what's going on when a very tall and slender figure walks into my room. To this day, I will never forget what that creature looked like. Based on his appearance, he is best compared to a Kaminoan from Star Wars. Surprisingly similar, to be honest. He was tall, white, and extremely slender, and seemed to have no bones. He had long fingers and black eyes with yellow pupils. I looked it in the eye and felt a sense of awe, wonder, and horror that I still cannot experience or describe. It emitted a bright white glow that lit up my room like a nightlight. And this is when my memory gets a little more hazy. But there are some pictures in my mind that I have not forgotten. The creature whispered with insistence and a slight hint of menace in its voice. Do I owe this question? Probably due to lack of sleep and the fact that I couldn't understand any aspect of the situation. I remember getting out of bed and going downstairs feeling so surreal. They didn't let me in the water or take me out, but somehow when I followed the thing down, I didn't make a sound. I had no socks on and there was a wooden ladder, but I made absolutely no noise. It felt like I hadn't even touched the stairs. It's really hard to describe because I felt practically deaf, because I couldn't make any noise. The alien is waiting for me in the kitchen, and I look around again to make sure I'm not dreaming. I see my dog at the end of the kitchen, shaking, tail tucked. She only whimpered a little, but for some reason she didn't bark or growl. By this point, surprisingly, I'm sweating profusely. I can feel my body and I'm out of excuses for dreaming. I see this thing standing there, almost indifferent. Another thing I won't forget either is the sheer lack of emotion this thing displayed. It could feel anything at that moment, and I would never be able to guess what it was thinking. Somehow I decided to say the only sentence to him, the only thing I ever said to him, and it was that I don't want to. I felt hoarse, exhausted, nauseous from all the events. It took an effort for me to say something so stupid, but it got to me. They didn't make a sound either, and he grabbed my hand. His hand felt sticky and burned to the touch. Nothing terrible, but it was like grabbing a cup of hot coffee based on sensation. I held back any arguments or questions because of my tiredness, and we get back to my room, and this thing picks me up with almost no effort and half throws me back onto the bed. He then slammed the door very loudly and disappeared almost at the same time. After the door slammed, it wasn't until 30 seconds later that my parents burst in. They were asking me what the hell had just happened, and the look on their faces when they saw me in my condition looked like they were in shock. I was drenched in sweat, noticed my hand, and almost cried. You know when a friend slaps you on the back really hard and it leaves a handprint? Well, it was on my arm, and I could still feel the burn from the alien's grip. Soon my dog entered the room, and she too was shaking, whining even more, and started licking my face. For most of my life, even at a young age, I thought the paranormal and alien stuff was pure nonsense. I've just never been interested in it, and my friends have never said anything that would lead me to believe otherwise. My parents listened carefully to my story, and I was surprised that they honestly believed me. But they never told the authorities, the news, or even family and friends about it. It just remained a secret. I guess I kind of understand and almost don't blame them because of the social stigma behind aliens. Both my parents hold respected positions in society, and I'm sure they would be mad if they made such statements. I'd never told anyone about it before, and it only visited me once after that. But for some reason I didn't feel the fear or shock that I felt the first time. It just disappeared in the blink of a second, but it was still unmistakable. If you guys have any similar encounters, I'd love to know. This creature has always crossed my mind over the years, and I would like to know if anyone else has seen anything like it. Again, this does not affect my life in any way, but I simply cannot keep this story under wraps. Anyway, any other questions you have for me, I'd be happy to answer in the comments below. Thank you for listening.